Good evening. This is Donna Marie Todd, coming to you live from A Widow's Tale. Our Widow's Tale live stream tonight is sponsored by Dr. Catherine Yael Sorota Sheely. And Dr. Sheely wanted me to answer a question for her on tonight's live stream. Oh, by the way, happy birthday, Dr. Sheely. She wanted to know how COVID has impacted my personal relationships and my worldview as a widow. Great question, Dr. Sheely. And here's part of my answer. I want you to meet my co host for tonight. This beautiful lady rode home in my car with me from the Target parking lot. She was almost ready to be run over by a car when I discovered her amazing beauty. She's an amazing yellow swallowtail. And right now, she's recovering a little bit. She's drinking some nectar using her little feet, and she's resting. Apparently, she's had a rather hard day. I don't know if she was hit by a vehicle or almost captured by a bird or what might have happened to her. But butterflies are a great model for widowed people. And I want to tell you why. But first, I'm going to get back to Dr. Sheely's question about how COVID has impacted my personal relationships and my worldview as a widow. I have to say that in some ways, I am closer to people now than I was before the virus and its isolation. And the reason for that is that I have rediscovered friends via FaceTime and Zoom. Anybody else done that? It's been a lot of fun to have Zoom cocktails with people I usually don't even get to see more than once or twice a year. And that's been a kind of a blessing in the midst of the curse of COVID. My worldview has changed in the sense that this is the first thing in my memory where not only are we being impacted in the United States, which is where I live, by COVID and all the isolation and the drop in income and things like that, but this is a worldwide problem. And there are many, many countries in this world that are going to come out of this virus much less financially well off than they went into it, and many of us personally as well. Now, for someone who's widowed and lives alone, as I do, I think the isolation has been really almost near unbearable, and some very odd things have happened. Um, for instance, I used to see people at church and in small local gatherings or going out to lunch with friends. And so I'm in a small community and I had very close relationships within my community. And those people I haven't really seen since COVID started because it hasn't been safe. And I've been busy catching up with friends from all over the world, Australia, the UK, Canada, the United States. So I really haven't paid as much attention to like FaceTiming with those friends or Zooming maybe as much as I could have. But I've found that this isolation is only increasing my sense of being removed from other people. And that isolation is just part of widowhood. And that locking down of our society has kind of forced me to go within, not unlike a butterfly entering a cocoon. My friend here, this beautiful yellow swallowtail, she is enormous for a butterfly, and she had to spend a lot of time in the darkness of her cocoon getting ready to come out and live in the world. And sometimes I feel like that's the way it is for widowed people. We have to go to a dark place when we're newly widowed and cocoon ourselves. There's an isolation that is unavoidable. And most people don't really know what to say or do when they encounter us anyway. So they assist us in that isolation, not unlike what is happening right now during COVID. And then there's this whole thing with the masks. Like I know that they're good for our health, and I always wear one when I am outside. I'm very vigilant about that, and I don't meet in small groups, even in my yard, without my mask. But the mask keeps us from seeing other people as they really are. And so what I've discovered is that when I'm wearing my mask and I'm out and around in my small community and I'm going to the grocery store or I'm at the post office, I am not making eye contact with other people, nor are they making eye contact much with me, unless it's the checkout person saying, "May I help you?" You see, we're herd mammals, and We need to know what people are thinking by watching their faces. We are hardwired to receive this information about other people. And when someone has on a mask and we can only see their eyes, that cuts off a huge amount of information. For instance, if somebody was to say to you, I really love to watch bumblebees, do you? And you were in a mask and you said, me too. The words would say, me too. But the facial expression, from what you can see here, would say no. And yet, if that person was smiling, going, me too, then that would be totally different. So you see, we're cut off from this very important communication form that we have, which is facial recognition and identity. So I think that's made us even more isolated during COVID than we might otherwise be. Not the masks so much, but the cutoff from facial recognition and from the ability to really tell what someone else is thinking about us. And hugs. Oh my gosh, do I miss hugs. I am a hugger. And so when I can't hug somebody, it is just so hard for me. So when I see people that I know and love, even if I'm wearing a mask, I want to run up and hug them to say, you are important to me. I love you. But in this day and time, those kinds of communications are just not happening. And I am with a serious hug deficit trying to make it through the rest of COVID. Now, there are some things about isolation that are good if we turn inward. I mean, for one thing, when COVID hit, I was finally forced to write that book about widowhood that I have been planning to write now for the last 5 years. 5 years. But I've been on the road all over this country leading retreats for widowed people, leading full day retreats where we could sit together and talk about the challenges of widowhood, share our stories, share laughter about jokes only we can get, because there are some things only widowed people really get. You kind of have to have been widowed before you get some of these things. But the isolation forced me inward and forced me to think about that book, and dogged if I didn't finish Navigating Loss, a survival guide for the newly widowed, this spring. And now I'm creating a 6-part video series to go along with the book so that I can offer in-home bereavement services for widowed persons. Do you know that with the addition of COVID widowhood, we will now be looking at close to 1 million widowed persons in the United States this year? If you are a widowed person, you are not alone. It's just that we become invisible when we become widowed. Mask or no mask, widowed people are invisible in our society. And there is, as I mentioned, this need for isolation. We have to go within, not unlike my co-host here. Oh, look, she's going to move her wings and you can see how beautiful she is. Isn't she marvelous? Just as she, in order to become a butterfly, had to crawl into a cocoon and stay in a dark space for a very long period of time, so widows and widowers also have to go into a dark space to re-find who they are, to re-identify with themselves. Because widowhood changes absolutely every aspect of our lives, from our social identity to our financial selves, to our relational selves, sexual selves, all parental selves. If you have children and you're widowed, your relationship to your children changes. You become a solo parent, which is very different than being a divorced parent. It's very different. And all these changes, they force us further and further into isolation because there's so much to sort out, right? There's so many things to think through, so many things to decide about, how you want to live your life in the future. And so we have to go into a time of very deep preparation in order to become a full-fledged butterfly. But here's the beauty of that. If we don't stay cocooned, and now here's the thing, a lot of widowed people that I meet stay in their dark cocoon. They're afraid to come out. And there's no one standing there saying, hey, come on out in the light. Let your wings dry off so that you can fly, beautiful one. But if we're brave enough, like this butterfly, to come out of our cocoon, to sit in the sun, to let our wings dry, then what we discover is that while we were inside of that dark, sacred space, new parts of us were being born. For instance, the most compassionate people I know are my fellow widows and widowers. The most intentional people I know are my fellow widow and widowers because we understand that life is fragile and death can come at any minute. And so, like my friend, this beautiful butterfly, when we leave our cocoon and we sit in the sun a little bit and we spread our wings and fly, we bring something very beautiful to the world, something very beautiful indeed. So, as I'm looking at COVID and isolation, I'm wondering what beautiful things are being born inside of your isolation. You can learn more about my work at awidowstale.com. You can sponsor events like this by joining me as a patron on Patreon at awidowstale.com. And if you'd like to learn more about surviving widowhood, purchase a copy of my book. It's at a bookseller near you and on Amazon. And that is A Survival Guide, Navigating Loss, a Survival Guide for the Newly Widowed. And from my co-host tonight and myself, I wish you a very pleasant good evening. Goodbye.